So many thanks to Anna-Lena and to our panelists for that really interesting discussion. So I think there we've really heard about some of the challenges in terms of transnational cooperation. And it transitions very nicely into our next video, where we're actually going to hear again from our members what they have to say about the challenges that they're experiencing in terms of collaborating across borders.
It could help a lot to create these, let's say, multinational universities or international universities. I think legal frameworks are a big barrier. We need to homogenize the curriculum, or maybe not homogenize, but just be more open. Okay, we have all this Bologna Declaration and the other, but at the end, what we really need is that there are not so many bureaucracy. There's a lot of unnecessary bureaucracies.
Transnational cooperation projects and actions is represented by the difficulties and barriers against the authentic and dynamic recognition of learning experiences. Not only competencies and skills, we are very much in favor of using learning experience because our students, traditional, not traditional, will be deeper and highly motivated, involved in different learning experiences. They are committed to try to live in this context. And of course, I could mention here also the credit points and why not the academic papers, degrees, diplomas and certificates as well. Here, the lack of diplomas trust, despite of the huge progresses registered in the last decade. It's perhaps most easier to co-create a joint program from a curricular construction generated, of course, in commonally, then build a mutual way to flexibilize and recognize learning experiences as part of the teaching and learning processes.
We are on an island, so traveling and moving around is a little bit more complicated for us since we cannot, let's say, take the train and go to another country. So given our sensibility and awareness around sustainability and our footprint, we want to limit our footprint regarding traveling. But of course, it's necessary to move to visit the campuses of our partners abroad, whether they are EUT plus partners or not. To get to know their infrastructure, etc., to have physical meetings, and this is one important impact that we see quite regularly, since we do need to travel around for our projects.
So in terms of challenges, thinking specifically of our work within Europe, I think the obvious example is Brexit. It's a shame that we are out of the Erasmus framework program, which is I guess a shame for our staff and our students. We do have a domestic alternative now in the UK that's been running for a couple of years, but it doesn't provide us with the bilateral benefits that we got from being part of Erasmus, and the whole idea of it being a truly reciprocal scheme. And then on the research front, Brexit obviously has posed an issue in that we still don't quite have certainty on whether or not we will associate to Horizon Europe.
In the European Universities Initiative, we find that we are facing more barriers and challenges than we had perhaps anticipated in this deep transnational collaboration. Despite working on the Bologna process reforms for over 20 years, the education landscape in Europe is still very fragmented, and there still are many legal barriers due to different rules in different countries. There are legal barriers that need to be overcome, for example, when developing a joint degree, as well as issues such as trusting the quality assurances in the various systems. So policy changes at the national level are important, but how this is addressed in the different countries appears to vary greatly. I would also like to mention something that you would think is relatively minor, such as how the academic calendars differ so widely in universities across Europe, which is proving to be a barrier of the seamless mobility envisioned within the European university alliances. There are also administrative hurdles such as registering students, issuing transcripts or records, and most importantly, credit recognition. It is also critical to provide more sustainable funding for such deep and university-wide collaboration. Without the certainty of long-term funding, it is difficult to address such fundamental changes in higher education and the way universities operate.
I think it's a challenge to find the right balance between central and decentral initiatives, between bottom-up and top-down, and evidently also for allowing for academic freedom to entirely foster, but also take into account certain framework conditions.
Everything changed in February 22. University of Lapland's internationalization strategy has always been based on good relations and collaboration with our Arctic neighbors. Russia is half of the Arctic, and it's our neighbor. It's, of course, all Western countries needed to close all institutional collaboration, and this included also University of Lapland. So a huge chunk of our kind of collaboration history just disappeared. This was sad and dramatic, but the only possible way to proceed. So that challenge is, all other challenges at the moment are in a way seem small technical issues compared to this one, that we simply cannot continue the type of collaboration that is really necessary, because many of the issues related to kind of a research and education here, require solutions that where Russia needs to be a partner. So things like climate change or human rights issues related to indigenous peoples, or the problems haven't gone away, but it's a huge challenge to not be able to collaborate to kind of find solutions together.
So, having heard then a huge variety of challenges across Europe from our members, we're now actually going to turn to look at some of the latest trends in transnational cooperation, and we're going to have a discussion and exchange on the academic perspectives of this topic. So I'd like to hand over to moderate this session to Irina Ferencz, who is Director of the Academic Cooperation Association. So, Irina, please.
Yes, thank you very much, Amanda. Thank you very much, Annalena and Thomas, for the kind invitation to moderate this panel, for which we have received, I would say, the very interesting task of contributing to the wider discussion on transnational cooperation with what you see clearly also in the title of the panel, academic perspectives, both on the present as well as on the future of transnational cooperation, primarily but not exclusively in a European context. And we have been kindly asked to do that by the EUA colleagues by building on the evolving body of higher education research on the topic of transnational cooperation from various perspectives. I have to admit that the academic perspective is more of a challenge for me, I think, here in the panel. So I will try for the next 30 minutes or so to put a bit aside my ACA director hat and adopt a researcher's lens. But we are in very good company, I think, to have this conversation from an academic perspective with the two professors here to my right. Allow me to briefly introduce them both, and I would say that actually quick look at their biographies show at least 2 points in common. You're both professors of higher education, and you both seem to be linked professionally with the United Kingdom as a place of teaching and research. I'm sure we'll find more commonalities and points of common interest through the discussion. But first, Jeroen Huisman is professor of higher education at Ghent University here in Belgium. leading also the Center for Higher Education Governance Ghent, or CHEG in short. A very impressive body of publications, many different activities that we don't have time to quote here, unfortunately. But I will say that Jeroen arrived in Ghent after a professorship position at the University of Bath in the UK. In the UK, literally, from the UK, literally, this morning comes Liviu Matei from King's College London, where he is head of school and also professor of higher education and public policy. A rather recent transition, I think, Liviu, and I'm sure many of you actually know Liviu much better through his previous institutional affiliation, many years, in many prominent positions at the Central European University, or CEU, for the longest time in Budapest, Hungary, now more recently in Vienna, Austria. We'll also discover, I think, through the conversation, if you are united also in your views when it comes to transnational cooperation in the European context. I do hope, though, we'll not have a perfect union in that respect, so that we can have some different perspectives and also a bit of a debate. To get us started, I would say that higher education research has mapped out over the years various forms of cooperation between higher education institutions and has tried to propose some classifications to help us with our conversation about the evolutions we see in the field. We've also had contributions related to governance, to rationales for cooperation, many of the elements we have actually heard about in the previous panel. So to get us started, I'd like to pose the same question to both of you and ask you very briefly, how do you perceive the evolution of transnational cooperation at university level, particularly in the European context, and what are, in your view, some of the more important trends that we should pay attention to at current times? Jeroen, perhaps we start with you?
This one working?
Not yet, I think.
Is it working? Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Irina. Thank you, European University Association, for inviting me. Pleasure to be here. Trends, yes, we have wonderful trends regarding international collaboration over the past decades, but unfortunately this pattern has been stirred by unprecedented changes, of course, that happen due to COVID and political economical developments. So there is a bit of fuzziness around what is happening in the past years, but nevertheless you can still argue, and this is common sense for you, I guess, international collaboration being on the rise, much more collaboration in research, in areas of curricular collaboration, mobility, if you also see that as part of cooperation. All upward trends. The only thing I recently discovered that in terms of, for instance, Erasmus Mundus programs, the last call where projects have been granted, there were much fewer programs than in the years before. But okay, maybe that's only a small change. Yes, another platitude, and then maybe something more refreshing. We see this development from these individual initiatives, bottom up projects, etc., towards more institutional collaboration. Yes, the European University Initiative is on the rise. That is an important trend in development, I think, that nicely fits in with increasing autonomy of higher education institutions in general, and a trend that we see in the literature around higher education institutions becoming strategic actors, becoming real, between brackets, organizations. Again, I'm not saying that much news. I think what we can glean from the literature. Maybe good to stress here that much of the research on higher education focuses on European policies. So we're evaluating Erasmus, we're evaluating the European University Initiatives, Horizon 2020, all good. But we must keep in mind that this is only the top of the iceberg, the tip of the iceberg, where collaboration is taking place. There's so much collaboration in mobility, in curricula, and in research taking place without any European mandate to do that, because researchers, academics, and students are interested in collaborating, in traveling, etc. I think we should stress that also and bring that into the picture to evaluate where we currently stand. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, for the beginning. So a good push, if I can rephrase from the European level and policy developments, but certainly not the only push when it comes to current developments we see in terms of collaboration. You've also talked a bit about the fuzziness of developments, but also about some positive trends we see related to alliances at present. So Liviu, I'm wondering if you share these observations, reflections, and if you have more insights to add.
Thank you very much, Irina, for this kind introduction, and thank you for the invitation. You mentioned that we have something in common with Jeroen, but we also have something which is not common. I mean, he left the UK. I went to the UK. I don't know which move is wiser. We will see. But speaking of the state of research on transnational cooperation, as we call it here, and also current trends, I would say there is a lot of research on internationalization, right? And EUA has done a lot of research, by the way. EUA is a powerhouse in research, both in Europe and globally. And researchers also are quite fast in dealing with recent developments. European University Initiative is a very recent initiative, historically looking at it. And there are articles already about it, studies. I have committed a couple myself. But I would say very often, and certainly at present, because changes happen fast, we tend to stay at the surface a little bit. And it takes time, obviously, to go deeper and look at causes. And I would like to mention to illustrate with two aspects. So one is that if we see what is happening in the world at present, there's a kind of attempt by governments, including in democratic countries, to frame international, transnational cooperation, to direct it. Look at the UK, right? There's a very clear attempt, including the law that will pass probably next week on higher education, freedom of speech, which will include provisions about foreign interference in education. Look at the US. Look in Europe also. We are talking about the autonomy of Europe and how university cooperation should serve that purpose. So there are some frameworks that are new, perhaps not that new as a matter of fact, and they kind of create the constraints within which cooperation happens. And where does it come from? Speaking of causes, which we take longer to look at. And I would like here, if I may, this is a hypothesis. There are several moments extremely influential in the history of internationalization of higher education cooperation. In higher education, there was 9/11, there was COVID, but I think the two most influential, impactful recently have been the fall of the Berlin Wall. I will go as back as that. And then now the war in Ukraine. And what has happened with the fall of the Berlin Wall is that the Iron Curtain has fallen and everything has changed. We have seen increased international cooperation, accelerated globalization, not only in Europe, cooperation in higher education, international, transnational, however we want to call it, at an unprecedented pace and intensity. Now, which was made more clear by the invasion of Russia in Ukraine, there is no new Iron Curtain. There is no one curtain that goes from north to south or wherever, but there is a kind of iron veil above certain parts of the world. And it's not only Russia, right? Russian universities don't have the possibility to cooperate if they would like. We don't cooperate with them sometimes because our governments don't allow us. Think of China, think of other parts of the world. So there is a new environment, a new geopolitical environment that has obliged states to, or has created a possibility for nation states and unions like the EU to position in a way that is different from before. And that changes the parameters of international, transnational cooperation. This has not been studied. So speaking of the causes, but we are more and more aware of the consequences. I was very impressed the other day at another conference when a colleague from a Nordic country presented the case of a kind of inter-university group that is concerned with implementing national policies with regard to security. Now, how universities should comply sometimes having to go to secret services to ask for permission to cooperate. That is new, and that comes in this context. So this is one. The second one, and that also, this part I think will allow me to say a few words about international versus transnational. Maybe you discussed that already in the first part. Why are we talking about transnational and not international? So what is the difference? So I think, and this also takes me to the European University Initiative. This is one of the most daring initiatives, endeavors in the history of higher education altogether, I would say, not only in Europe. So the idea of creating network of universities that will become one university, at least that's theoretically, it's from a university network to become a network university, transnational. That is extremely daring. It comes with dangers. It comes with collateral worries, if I may put it so. But it is something unprecedented. So what is this about if we look beyond the surface or below the surface, rather? And let me mention now, responding to Irina's challenge to see things a little bit more in a global perspective. There is another very interesting initiative. You might know about it, Open Society University Network. And I should perhaps disclose I was one of the founding vice chancellors of this network. So that is a network created, that's an initiative not intergovernmental like EUA is, but non-governmental. Universities from around the world have come together to create a university network with the idea that they might merge one day in one university, supported by a non-governmental, global non-governmental organization financially. So, it is also, it's almost impossible to, or it is difficult to believe that this will succeed, having Arizona State and Asian University for Women merging with Al-Quds University and Central European University, but that's what they are trying to do. So for me, these are parallel initiatives. One is intergovernmental, the other one is non-governmental, trying to go beyond the power of the states. So to create really transnational as in supranational, not confined to the regulatory powers and legal jurisdiction in one particular jurisdiction, but trying to go beyond it. Will they work? I don't know. We have seen other initiatives, transnational initiatives in higher education. Some of you might remember Global Alliance for Transnational, what was it, GATT, but not the GATTs. It was, the idea was to create an accrediting agency that doesn't depend on states and doesn't work for states. Global, genuinely global, independent accreditation agency. It didn't work. It died after a few years. So EUI might not succeed, EUA, no, let me say the full name, European University Initiative, right, to avoid the abbreviation, might not succeed. The Open Society University Network might not succeed, but these are efforts to transcend the state, to aim at genuine transnational, supranational cooperation.
Thank you, Liviu. I think, we've identified another common element through your interventions, and that is, I think both of you are very close to the practice of international collaboration and institutional realities. And I think what you brought up, Liviu, as well in your intervention, amongst others, was also this longitudinal approach or view that comes from higher education research at looking at some of these trends and tendencies over times, identifying some of the same issues emerging, perhaps not in the exact same way as you made the point as well, but also the important role that the states can play in this context beyond what colleagues in the previous panel have shared already. Thinking back a bit again to the previous discussion, we have already heard about various models of cooperation and cooperation beyond alliances. At the same time, if I think within higher education research, but also in our field, we rarely talk nowadays, I think, about plain cooperation. We very often, when we talk about cooperation in a transnational context, international context, if we wish, we use some strong adjectives: strategic, innovative, transformational at the moment. So, Liviu, I'd like to come back to you, actually, for a brief answer. to a very complex question, because time is short. So of course, what does every moderator do when time is short? Packs more into a big question. It's a three-part question. And one is, do you see an evolution towards more institutionalized forms of cooperation between higher education institutions like the alliances at the moment within the European Universities Initiative context? And if you do you see them also becoming the norm for channeling cooperation? And I'll bring back Anna-Lena's question on the quantum leap and the likelihood of such collaborations generating these quantum leaps that policymakers have set at the forefront of such initiatives. An academic perspective, because we've heard, I think, different perspectives.
So my take on this is that we are rather seeing attempts at new institutional forms of cooperation. So I'm not sure I don't know exactly what institutionalization of cooperation would mean, but I think there are new institutional forms. So these European university alliances are a new institutional form. It's like, you know, as an attempt, and again, I don't know whether it will succeed or not. You can ask me again, but I will say the same. I don't know. It is in a way similar in one way to the emergence of the university in the modern times. So a new form of institution emerged, which played a role in, by the way, in the emergence of nation states. And I think what is tried in Europe is to create a new institutional form in higher education that might support a new type of political construction, which is Europe, whatever we call it, federal, quasi-federal, sui generis, something. But this is so, and you know, we can go on and on. Universities are instruments in this regard. The initiative doesn't come from them. They are used for political purposes, and they might want to be willing participants, or if not willing, enthusiastic or unenthusiastic. But I think this is what I would put as a hypothesis. Major new trends, new attempts in international, transnational cooperation don't come from universities themselves in current times.
Jeroen, are universities instruments or strategic actors?
They are both, obviously. A couple of qualifications about this institutionalized form, European University Initiatives, very much in the limelight, and rightly so. But at the same time, we should not forget that only a small percentage of higher education institutions across Europe are really involved. You know, it's a small, really small percentage. And as I said before, and it's also been mentioned by Kathleen, I think, universities are involved in all kinds of initiatives that are under the radar because they like to work together in a certain area. They do that, they want to put the resources in that, and they go for it. Great. So no watershed change, I think, because I also looked at the history. Actually, already in the 1990s or late 1980s, universities were developing, who does remember them, European policy statements. You had to do that in the context of Socrates. The older generation still remembers that. And you can brush that away and say, well, that was, you know, scratching at the surface and it was symbolic. But actually, I will still like to see that as the first small steps of universities to take these developments to the strategic level, at the policy level, to start with that. So I see an organic change. It's not a watershed change. Will it be a quantum leap? I don't know. I was triggered by Michael Murphy's metaphor of the canary in the coal mine. Yeah. Using the canary, you can come back and learn something, but we also know, tragically from experience, that a lot of canaries died. So that's where we are. I think I hope the best that we can take these lessons and improve practices, etc. At the same time, it might also be that we say, well, there was no gold in the mine this time around, and we have to do other things.
So I think this observation that very few universities actually participate, it's very important. But there's another aspect here, speaking of the magnitude of this initiative and how change happens, how strategic initiatives emerge. all universities want now to be part of a European alliance. Some didn't want, many didn't want at the beginning, but they want now. And how did it happen? We can say, well, it's for money, funding. It isn't. I was part of one alliance, Civica. We were at the beginning, in the first round, 6, 7, including one from the UK university. The budget was 2 million for 4 years. So you calculate, it's a couple of 100,000 per university per year. Couple of 100,000 per university per year. The funding has increased in the meanwhile a little bit, but 200,000 is nothing for any university, even the ones that are not rich. So it wasn't for money. And still, I mean, if we look at the total envelope, I don't know how much it was, 200-something million in the first round. It's still a lot of money for the EU. But if we look per unit, it's very little. So this is how, is this a strategic initiative for universities? It is, but it wasn't at the beginning. It became one. So it comes from something else, and because it has power, big power, and it's not the money power, but some other kind of power, it might overshadow, if not kill, other forms of cooperation. So it is becoming kind of what we see most visible and what we all want to do. And I don't know what will be left, even in terms of interest of universities. It would be interesting to study.
I think if we were to do a short survey now in the room, we would find almost unanimity in the fact that it's not the economic rationales that drive, I think, participation in alliances. It would be interesting, though, to have some further research on what actually drives this particular type of collaboration. Now, speaking of what you said last, Liviu, about the potential impact, nonetheless, at institutional level and potentially negative consequences on other types of collaboration, I'm wondering if it might be a question of size as well. Kathleen, I think, brought in the previous panel the question that for larger universities that have more resources available, continuing with diverse types of collaborations might be easier than for others that are smaller in size and might have to prioritize resources. And that actually leads me, Jeroen, to the next question for you, because organizational diversity is also one of your research areas, interest areas. We seem to take for granted a little bit, if I may say so, this positive value of diversity. So I'm wondering if higher education research actually shows us any concrete evidence that engaging in a wider diversity of partnerships at institutional level is actually more beneficial long-term, let's say, than going for one or very few models.
I wish I could give a proper answer to that question, because it is an important one. Higher education research is not at that stage to give the answer to that, unfortunately. So that this is criticism on higher education researchers, including myself. It's also self-criticism. I think we should put more effort in trying to find answers to this question. Very recently, I did a publication with Hannah Ferenbach, and it's just published in Journal of Studies in International Education, where we did a literature review on strategic collaboration. And we were amazed by the magnitude of research, so many different studies done on this topic, but also disappointed to a large extent in terms of what research designs have been used by researchers to find the answers to their questions. All these researchers on these collaborations are small scale. They are carried out in very specific context, which makes it difficult to generalize these findings or to learn lessons for other partners. When researchers look for the success of these collaborations, they struggle to find an answer, because they quite often measure success as satisfaction of participants. That is important, of course, to know something about the participants and how they feel about the change, but only looking at satisfaction is, of course, not enough. So a plea for higher education researchers to both jump on the European University initiatives, but also look at this magnitude of other collaborations taking place currently in Europe, and use proper methods to try to find, does it work? What does work? How can we improve?
Very interesting. I think, yeah, also point on how to improve higher education research in the future and what to focus on. I think we've collected already a number of ideas for further research. I thank you for that, but also looking a bit at the time and being acutely aware that after the panel we have a well-deserved break. I want to bring us to the final question. The question of the future is in the title of our panel, so I fear we have to address it somehow. None of you seem to have brought with you a crystal ball, but foresight analysis is something that is becoming more and more prominent also in higher education research. So with that, I'd like to ask you, how do you think or wish that university cooperation across Europe, but feel free to comment also at global level if you wish, will evolve in the coming 5 to 10 years? And let's see, Jeroen, maybe we start with you.
Okay. I won't say a wish. It's almost Christmas time, so I'm tempted to speak about a wish. Well, just to put things in a context, you know, we are all enthusiastic about all kinds of developments that take place, but if you look back at the history of higher education and the big quantum leaps that have taken place, there are not that many. So change in higher education is doomed to be organic and slow. So I don't expect, sorry, but that was based on my insight on literature. I don't expect any big changes. In 5 years' time, we will see more collaboration, we see more evaluations, we see a slightly different European university initiative, maybe. Let's see. Thank you.
Yeah. Liviu, please go ahead.
I really don't have a crystal ball, but you know, I think that international cooperation globally will realign following these new lines of fracture and how governments in particular and, you know, blocks of powers position themselves. You know, there's China, there's Europe. We forget about Africa, we forget about Latin America, but they exist as well, and you know, Southeast Asia, Australia. I think they are fine by themselves. They are not unhappy that we don't mention them. But there will be realignments there, and there will be realignments which are driven by geopolitical new realities, and perhaps also by absorbing COVID. We haven't absorbed really the changes that came with COVID and those that will stay, after COVID. In Europe, if we look at the recent past, international cooperation, higher education policy in general was based, I would say, on three, perhaps four powerful policy narratives: knowledge society, Europeanization, democratization. This is what helps to explain a lot of the things that happened in Europe in the last 20 years. Now, knowledge society has been abandoned as a policy narrative by many governments, not by the European Union, by the European Commission. So it's still there. Europeanization, I would have said that Europeanization is stalled at the beginning, at least if not reversed. But the European University Initiative is an amazing development that speaks for Europeanization. Perhaps it's a different type of Europeanization. And I think democratization is also not there. So there will probably be changes that will result at the intersection of different policy narratives, some continuing, some altered, some dropped and replaced. And the very last comment, I might have appeared very negative, critical about the European University Initiative. I mean, that's a research criticism. Otherwise, I am a great supporter. I think this is amazing that is happening, but we should not, that should not make us blind, and in particular as researchers.
On the wider themes, I think also, as it was mentioned in the previous panel as well, we have an emerging conversation about the values and values-based cooperation. For me, that's related a bit to democratization, of course, but it goes beyond perhaps or deeper. Well, we've heard you well, I think. I do hope that the EUA colleagues will organize an update event maybe in 5 to 10 years so that we can see whether your predictions, as well as those of other colleagues, were right or not. I think they were well received, though, even, you know, the slowness of change. I do see some colleagues in the audience from European Universities Alliances that at least didn't seem shocked by the expectations, so that's good to see. With that, I want to actually warmly invite you, those in the audience here on site, to address Jeroen and Liviu with questions or comments you might have to their insights during the upcoming break. I'd like to thank you very much for your contributions, to all of you for your attention.